Today I will be facing every single rank from Novice all the way up to Grandmaster, playing classic world domination settings without blizzards. So first of all we got a Novice ranked player. This is how he selected our territories. And from what we can see, he selected a lot of border territories, connecting his territories in a very favorable for me way and creating me a lot of hiding spots for my army. And I will go to hide it in Australia, because as the second player you will usually win by capturing Australia with South America while basically capturing as many territories as possible. A Novice rank player decided to go with two different armies in isolated places, but I think not because he thought that I will place my army in one of them, but because he wants to capture both of these continents without really knowing that he should go after as many territories as possible to highly minimize my territorial troop bonus. Though to place your armies like that could still sometimes be a good strategy to try predicting your opponent's army and then really expect getting favored with the attacker's advantage while attacking with a smaller army. But with Novice going for Africa and North America, it's clear that the continents is what he mostly cares about. But that wasn't a really smart choice, as he would have had to do all of those troop splits, even if he had enough troops and time, so a better decision would have been with newly gotten troops to go for as many of my connected territories in a straight line as possible. So like I just did, attacking my opponent's territories. Getting to North America, I decided to rather go towards South America rather Asia, as South America is what he is about to capture, so I needed a better access to it. Also, as you saw, I didn't unleash Purple's biggest army because it would stay blocked, so he couldn't recapture a lot of territories. At the end of my turn I fortified my troops to Australia, but honestly with my opponent receiving only 3 troop territorial bonus it wouldn't have been enough to invade it either way. So a better decision would have been to fortify them to the Middle East to protect Asia and be ready to capture territories with those troops again. But Novice wouldn't have been a Novice if he hadn't let me hold unguarded Asia. So after that he just had to rage quit. And that's an easy win against a Novice ranked player. Moving on to the beginner ranked player, he did the same bad job when it comes to the territory selection, as he selected a lot of important border territories, which really lets me move with my entire army in the whole map freely, and as you can see there were still a lot of places for me to hide my army as well. From what I can see, the beginner's goal was to go after continents as well, but differently than a Novice he split his troops into even more armies, which usually led you of capturing fewer territories in overall and some of your troops staying blocked. But despite that, his play is still better than Novice's, as he didn't waste his turn doing nothing. He achieved everything what he wanted and captured those continents. But that's basically the same strategy for me again. I have to break through all of his continents and capture lots of territories, ideally capturing Australia with South America, especially Australia, as this way even if he ends up with the territorial advantage, I could still successfully hold one of my continents, which will probably be Australia, as with it having one border it's so much easier to guard. Also you can see as the attacker I'm got some good attacker's advantage attacking his smaller armies, which really helps me get the momentum. Despite my opponent recapturing these continents, I still end up with more than half of the territories of the map for a good territorial troop bonus, and at the same time I have Australia as well, which gives 2 continental troops too. As you saw, I had way too many troops in Australia, so I decided that I will rather use some of them to guard South America as well. My opponent doesn't have enough troops to break through it, and if it wasn't clear what I'm in a dominating position before, now it definitely should. I beat the beginner ranked player going second as well. Moving to the intermediate rank player, his territory setup was as bad as both of my previous opponents too. But the afterward stage wasn't that dumb anymore, as my opponent actually put his troops to one big army in a place which would actually let him capture a lot of territories instead of making those troops blocked. Though it wasn't too smart for him to make those troop splits here, 3 versus 1 is not 100% blitz, so you could end up losing those troops, and in general you should avoid making those troop splits unless you see they're really needed, like it actually was in this case to capture South America. as my opponent came up with a brilliant move to block the exit from Australia with his biggest army, which wouldn't have been that bad at all, knowing that as the attacker I supposed to get the attacker's advantage, but with capturing South America he really made it that I should get good enough advantage, as otherwise he will end up holding South America. And I've got lucky this time. With blitzing his army I had enough troops to get to South America as well. But I think that was a mistake for me. Looking to this game back, I think I should have added my troops next to South America to invade it and capture as many territories as possible with them, and just not blitzing my opponent's army yet leaving my biggest army in Australia. But with very good attacker's advantage it ended up for me super well, and my opponent just immediately rage quit the game. Moving on to the expert rank player, basically his territory selection was as bad as my previous opponent's ones, letting me hide my stack in multiple different spots and have access to everything. But he actually ended up placing his army in Australia, with inexperienced players caring about the continents as the most important thing. That could be likely that a less experienced player will end up putting his army blocked like that to make sure to capture their beloved continent and then leave that large army on the border blocked. And Australia is actually the most popular continent choice for them, so if you go for the Australian army hiding strategy as well, be aware of that. But also keep in mind that smart players could try doing that as well after seeing your strategy and playing with you for multiple times, so if you face the same opponent don't become too obvious by placing your army to the same exact place every time, make sure to mix it up. With my opponent getting a very good attacker's advantage of losing even 9 troops fewer, I thought the game is immediately over for me, but I decided to still try my best to see if I can do anything to make a comeback. With my opponent being less experienced, that was possible to still expect him make some bigger mistakes. However, that didn't happen, and right there he didn't get a bad blitz roll to fail to invade me into South America. He then fortified a fairly large amount of troops out from Australia, so I thought maybe there will be my best chance to expect very lucky manual rolls and invade him into Australia, and when I needed a miracle the most, it actually happened, as I even ended fully taking over Australia, having 2 troops to guard it, which my opponent could get a bad blitz roll on, and that actually happened. In my turn, besides me ending up holding more than half of the map's territories, I had Australia as well. So I took over dominating position. Right here I took over South America and Africa as well, and despite him invading me into Australia and Africa, he couldn't have captured lots of territories, so there was no way for him to make a comeback. Moving on to the game with a master rank player, his territory selection was a bit better, as right here I didn't have that European-North American path anymore, and actually he almost ended up blocking my way out of Australia. But he made the biggest mistake of his life by selecting Middle East over Ukraine, as if he had left Middle East for me. Then with me already having Afghanistan and China, Australia wouldn't have been a good spot to hide my whole army anymore, as with doing that I would have isolated myself from the other continents besides Asia. But with him missing that brilliant idea, his territory setup was really bad as well, so with just not as many hiding spots for me in comparison with the other setups of my previous opponents. Moving to the gameplay stage, he was finally the first one who prioritized capturing as many territories as possible over going for continents or something else. So he was the only one who decreased my territorial troop bonus as much as possible below 12 territories. But similarly like my other opponents, he did those troop splits in the deploying stage, which made him lose some troops, and then when capturing territories with his biggest army he was making the troop splits as well, which was leading a bunch of his smaller armies of troops getting blocked or being crushed with the attacker's advantage for me. And this time, while capturing as many territories as possible and invading my opponent into all of his continents, I went for Australia and Africa. I would have loved to capture South America as well, but I didn't want to risk to not breaking into North America if I got some worse blitz rolls. In my second turn I ended up with 18 territories, which combined with Australia were pretty good. In his turn he was getting 6 troops while I was getting 8. So we continued like that back and forth before at 4 cards he traded in a set, which didn't really help him at all to regain position, even if I hadn't had a set at 4 cards myself. But with me having it, he was completely smashed, so he just left the game. Moving on to the Grandmaster rank player, his territory setup was extremely good. If putting his army into this place, he made that all of my territories would be accessible to him except these 2 spots. But with me putting my army there, I would be blocked from him as well, so unless he would unleash me the way or add his army to one of his already unleashed towards me territories. By going with the Australian hiding spot during this whole series, I wanted to play with Australian hiding spot again, but it obviously ended up backfiring me. I should have known better when playing with a Grandmaster ranked player. So he obviously didn't unleash my Australian army towards himself, and with that I was only able to break through Europe and Africa, letting him hold South America. Then I captured as many territories as possible with my main army, putting my army back to Australia, thinking that my opponent might make a mistake going for it and then potentially gets a bad blitz rule. But he just obviously went for the territories. But I was lucky enough to get good manual rolls this time to break through his South American army. And then I decided to fortify some of my troops out from Australia. So then my opponent tried to invade me into it, but he made a mistake that getting next to it he took the 5 versus 5 blitz roll, which is 27% instead of doing manual rolls, which you should use if the blitzing chance is below 50%. But despite that, he was still in a very good territory lead. But with me still holding South America during those times didn't really help, and once I wasn't able to recapture Australia, the game was basically over for me. But I still wanted to see if he makes any bigger mistake, or like if I get the second set at 3 cards while he only at 5. But neither of these 2 options happened, so that's no surprise I lost the game. Now if you want to steal my territories picking strategy, then click on the video on the left. Or if you're looking for more classical world domination 1v1 gameplay tips in general, then click on the playlist on the right.